It feels like we're in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance, right? These compounds are showing just incredible potential for treating some of the toughest mental health conditions we face. But, there's this huge, absolutely fascinating puzzle right at the heart of it all. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
So here's the core question, the big one. When someone gets better after psychedelic therapy, is it because of that profound, sometimes completely life-altering subjective experience they have? Or is that whole trip just a side effect of a much deeper biological process happening in the brain?
This one question has basically split the scientific community right down the middle. It's created two major camps with really compelling but totally different ideas about what's going on. Let's dive into the great debate. Okay, so on one side, you have what we can call the psychological journey theory. This camp says the mystical experience, the trip itself, is the whole point. It's what rewires a person's entire perspective, and that's what leads to the healing. And on the other side, you've got the biological rewiring theory. This one argues that the drug is something called a psychoplastogen that physically changes the brain's wiring, and the trip is just an interesting but ultimately unnecessary sideshow. So let's start with the case for the trip. This argument is backed by a pretty huge and growing mountain of data coming directly from human clinical trials.
First, a little bit of terminology. In all the research papers, they don't call it a trip. They call it the acute subjective effects, or ASE. It's just the scientific way of describing all those profound changes in perception, thought, and mood that happen in the hours after someone takes the substance. And this is where the evidence for the trip gets really, really compelling. I mean, we're talking about study after study, looking at everything from depression to addiction, and the researchers just keep finding the same thing. The more profound and meaningful a patient says their experience was, the better and longer lasting their recovery tends to be.
Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is how specific we can get. It's not just about how intense the trip was overall. Things like oceanic boundlessness, which is that incredible feeling of being one with the universe, and the level of psychological insight a person gains, those things show a really strong, statistically significant link with reduced depression. The numbers here are clear. As these specific experiences get stronger, depression scores go down.
This quote from a really important study just nails the point. It shows that the insights people have during the experience aren't just some fleeting thoughts. They are directly connected to real, measurable, and lasting changes in core personality traits like neuroticism. The big takeaway here seems to be that the experience is the engine of change.
Okay, but that's only half the story. Let's switch gears and move to the other side of this debate. Let's look at the case for pure chemistry, which comes mostly from animal research.
Now, this whole argument hinges on one key concept, the psychoplastogen. It's kind of a mouthful, but think of it like this. These compounds make your brain's wiring incredibly flexible, almost like it becomes soft clay for a little while, allowing it to rapidly grow and forge new connections.
So what does that actually mean? Well, these drugs physically encourage the growth of new branches between neurons, and they increase the number of communication points, which are called dendritic spines. The whole idea is that this lets the brain literally remodel those rigid, unhealthy circuits that are linked to things like depression. And these physical structural changes can stick around for a long, long time. And this theory has led to a pretty radical new goal. What if you could get all of that brain rewiring goodness without any of the acute subjective effects, without the trip? Well, scientists are actually creating compounds right now designed to do exactly that.
But, how do you test this in an animal that can't tell you if it's having a mystical experience? Well, on the left here, you can see they measure the therapeutic potential by looking for antidepressant-like behaviors. For instance, mice on these drugs just won't give up as easily in a stressful situation. And on the right, to measure the trip potential, they use something called the head twitch response, which is a surprisingly reliable stand-in for psychedelic effects in humans.
So we have two really powerful, compelling arguments. But as with all science that's this new, it's just not that simple. You have to look at the limitations and the weak spots on each side.
For the trip theory, the big knock is a classic in science. Correlation is not causation. Does the experience cause the healing, or is it more of a chicken and egg thing, where the people who are just naturally more open to healing are also the ones who report having more mystical experiences? And for the chemistry side, the limitation is pretty obvious, right? Animal models can only tell you so much. A head twitch in a mouse, well, that's a long, long way from a human's complex, conscious journey into the nature of reality.
So how in the world do we solve this puzzle? Well, Scientists are now designing some incredibly clever and kind of wild experiments to finally try and get a definitive answer.
Okay, so I know this slide looks a little complicated, but the big idea behind it is actually really simple. Scientists have dreamed up a bunch of clever new trials, and they all have the same goal: to finally, once and for all, separate the drug's purely biological effect from the conscious experience. That way, we can see which one is really doing the heavy lifting when it comes to healing.
And this leads us to one of the most mind-bending experimental questions being asked right now. What would happen if you gave a psychedelic to someone who was completely unconscious?
It's called the anesthesia trial. Here's how it would work. You take two groups of patients with depression. One group gets psilocybin the normal way, awake with therapists to support them. The other group gets the exact same dose, but while they're under general anesthesia, no conscious experience at all. Then, weeks later, you compare the results. Now, if the unconscious group gets better, that's huge evidence that the healing is purely biological. But if they don't, well, that would suggest the conscious experience is absolutely essential.
The answer to this question, it's not just some academic curiosity. It has absolutely massive implications for the entire future of mental health care.
Just think about it for a second. If the trip isn't necessary, you could develop a trip-free psychedelic pill. A treatment like that would be way cheaper, so much easier to administer, and it would be accessible to millions more people who might be unable or unwilling to go through the intensity of the full experience.
But, and this is a really big but, stripping the experience away also forces us to ask a much deeper question. It's one that goes way beyond biology and gets to the very heart of what healing even means.
So this is the thought I really want to leave you with. If this psychedelic journey can provide what many people describe as one of the single most profound and meaningful experiences of their entire life, does medicine have an obligation to offer that path to healing, even if a simpler, purely chemical pill becomes available? It's a question that goes way beyond the science, and it's the puzzle we're all still trying to solve.